All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to start the session. My name is Adrian Stanley, the General Manager from JMIR Publications. Welcome to everyone. We are a virtual panel here, so sorry we couldn't be there in person. Do message or chat any questions or comments you have. I believe Jennifer, our moderator in the room, is also going to help collate questions with us. Just as a quick sort of introduction to this session, I'm going to say a few words and then each of us will give a talk and a session. But we have Mathew Willmott from California Digital Library, Olaf Ernst from Knowledge Unlatched, and Katrin Seyler from Erlangen-Nuremberg University. So this session, the sort of key ingredients that we're bringing together is really looking at how libraries, technology providers, publishers are working together and collaborating in innovative ways and having a really interesting discussion about the complexities of working around open access and collaboration. So you're going to hear different perspectives. One thing that's sort of interesting to reflect on is this is one of, I think, Newton's laws of every action has a reaction to where we are to help develop an equitable, an efficient system where we're all sort of working together. Now, a number of us have all come together. We should pay credit to the OA Switchboard as a sort of central infrastructure and technology that helps deliver messages and has created, we're all part of sort of working groups and pilots looking at how we can automate and bring automation to decisions between libraries and publishers and technology providers. So if you're not aware of what the OA Switchboard does, I would highly recommend looking at that. There's a great group of collaborative people working together there. And just as a sort of high-level trend, this is just taken from a recent STM Global report that at least a third of sort of global research now is being published in open access. So seeing the trends, and there are some countries like the UK that are on track to publish about 90% of their research in OA. So really just thinking there is a different world now out there from what used to be subscription and transformative agreements to sort of more of fully OA world being envisaged. So some of the drivers for these discussions have been around this change of trend. But from that context too, and just looking and being aware of the every action as a reaction thing, there is a group of fully OA publishers, part of OASPA, who are also sort of just trying to make aware that the big picture transition to OA isn't just about also making the transformative agreements, but not forgetting where the pure OA publishers sit and how we can sort of make equitable systems for them to work with libraries as well. So just as a sort of context, this was a blog post that's written by a group of pure OA publishers as part of a OASPA working group. But now I'm going to hand over to Katrin to sort of share her updates first, and you'll see different perspectives from each of the speakers. We'll summarize and we'll have time for some Q&As.
Well, thanks, Adrian, and hi, everyone. I'm from Germany. I've got my sound on, which is usually my Achilles heel, so that's a good start. Thank you for choosing our session today, and I'm really thrilled to be here, and I've been really enjoying this collaboration. Just to repeat quickly and reintroduce myself, I'm the Open Access Administrator at FAU, which is a major university in the south of Germany, and we've been around since 1743, so quite some time, but we're also the first university in Germany with an open science policy as of last week. And I've gone somewhere cool today for you in your honor. This is actually not a fake virtual background. This is real. It's probably the fanciest room we've got, the Refugium Emeritorium. which is an office for retired professors where they can write in the esteemed company of some dead white men. So I thought you'd enjoy that, and it would be a fitting environment to talk to you about the author experience and how we try to enhance it through collaborating on the switchboard. So we have a lot of publications output at this university. And just a quick word on our local open access landscape, because that'll come up in the other talks later on. We basically try to support both fully open access publishing with the centralized publications fund, that's university money. And that's spent usually exclusively on open access journals, so hybrids needn't apply. But we have some power agreements as well, because we want to spread our support as wide as possible, because we value our authors' freedom of choice and want to kind of curb our influence on where they publish as much as possible, because you're always going to steer people towards things depending on the offers that are there. But we wanted to create as level a playing field as possible. So that's that. And I hope this is going to spark some thoughts about how a collaboration like the one between FAU and JMIR on the OA Switchboard can make a centralized messaging tool compatible with actual real life author communication, because a lot of us are dealing with that right now, and it's just going to grow alongside open access publishing. And author communication is also multilateral because it happens on the publisher side as well as on the institution side and the funder side as well. And obviously that produces issues. And what we've been trying to do is to calibrate the switchboard to preempt some of these issues that arise from author communication. So hopefully through this type of collaboration, we'll all end up with smarter systems where the author position is structural because it's part of the design, and that makes the author journey more smooth and more consistent. And last week was Open Access Week. Some of you probably know that. And there was a webinar where it was actually addressed that everything is getting very technical, and authors are struggling with the growing complexity of this landscape. So it's good that that's being recognized. And that there's consensus about this. They also noted that authors aren't necessarily part of designing this new infrastructure, but that doesn't mean that we don't think from their perspective in order to gear it towards everybody's needs. So we've been trying to put this into practice and work towards reducing this complexity. Because we're all well aware that the author is our common denominator. So everyone who's here, everyone who's listening, we're the support structure for the research community. And it made sense to us that the support structure kind of collaborates and shares insights, because that's really the only way that we can get to this place of transparency and shape the infrastructure to accommodate a multitude of needs from all sides. So the situation before is basically everything I knew before about what Adrian and his team are doing. That's all filtered to me through the author and vice versa as well. And obviously that's producing blind spots. So when we started talking to each other directly, we got a fuller picture of our processes and how authors behave within them as well. So that in itself created transparency, which then informed how we started thinking about the functions in the switchboard and how we can use them to resolve issues with author communication before they even pop up. So rethinking these tools, like the switchboard from an author perspective, has led to some points, such as that the author priorities shift across the publication process. So the author doesn't really think about the APC when they submit, they think about, does it get in? And the APC is an afterthought. That's hypothetical at that point to the author, and it's kind of a case of we cross that bridge when we get to that, except that the bridge is usually a post-acceptance, and then it's on fire because they realize that there's eligibility criteria for funding that haven't been met, or the license is wrong, the APC is too high, various things are going on. And because the priorities are mismatched, that means that authors don't communicate at the time that's right for institutions and for publishers. So it's necessary to realize that these communication needs are mismatched, and there's language barriers as well. I think it's easy to kind of gloss over that and think that academia is totally Anglophone and everybody speaks English, but that's definitely not the case always. And people prod me to kind of go on, you talk to them. And all of this causes issues. So being aware of these issues can be used to calibrate these tools and meet publishers and institutions' communication needs without having to rely on the author who has to relay information at a time that's convenient for us. So that's where the switchboard can help. For example, by enabling the publisher to send a funding request as an eligibility inquiry to institutions like us who manage a publications fund or several in the future. And they can do that at submission stage. So when the author's mind is on all sorts of other things on the next paper, but not on the APC. And I, who gets the message as representative of the institution, can then respond. Or I can have this bit automated as well, for example, through auto-reject messages. So the switchboard would look at the message for certain criteria that I've put in before and told it to look out for. So the APC is above this certain thing, or the license isn't the right one, or what have you. And it would automatically reject the request if it's not compliant with my conditions. I could do that manually as well, and include notes to JMIR saying, okay, yeah, theoretically this looks good, but the situation is this, and can we do this? So it kicks off a communications process, and there's an exchange of quite critical information at the right time without having to bother the author, and that creates efficiencies. So it's all a case about who needs to know what at what time. And just to sum up, basically collaborations such as ours are helping to make tools that serve the scholarly community better by distributing information, partly automated, at critical points in the process, and thereby reduces miscommunication and administrative burdens, and by making processes and requirements transparent so that we can bypass the author as a source of information, because that source of information has different priorities, can be unreliable, and can distort information, and that reduces complexity for them and for us. And that's me done. So the floor can be handed back to whoever wants it next, which is Adrian, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Katrin. And I'm going to give a sort of publisher's perspective now on these learnings and collaboration. Just for sort of some context, because JMIR does often fly under the radar, our sort of primary sort of focus point, you know, as an OA publisher, has been with the author rather than the librarian in the past. But just for some context, JMIR publishes 31 digital health related journals. We've also got a sort of a disruptive, innovative open science mission. Our founder, Gunther Eisenbach, was one of the co-founders of OASPA. He's done a number of sort of progressive things in the community, from actually developing altmetric before or around the same time as altmetric, to giving credits for reviewers, for encouraging things like research protocol publications, one of the first Oable journals in PubMed Central, and has plans around transforming to open science, what we call Plan P of a review of preprint. So just as a sort of context, we're a small, medium-sized publisher trying to really have an impact. And what we've seen with the OA Switchboard is it's really allowed us to have a great dialogue with librarians who are working with OA funds or supporting authors, but really understand their needs. One thing I would say from a sort of broader sort of perspective is there are different geographic needs. People in Germany and Europe have different mandates and funding and requirements to the UK, to North America and Canada. So it is interesting to sort of see the nuances across different areas. But I do believe through the sort of OA Switchboard and the collaborative working groups and advisory boards, we are trying to get to sort of common systems and standards where we can. And I do believe it is a sort of scalable process. But just to give you a sort of an idea of how we've approached this, one of the points about having eligibility messages that we can send to the libraries to see if there is central OA funds. As a process, we've been updating our submission form that works with the author to capture more information around funding, around APCs, also around article types. Some institutions will only fund certain types of articles. There's also a lot of reporting at the back end that you can do via the switchboard. So certain libraries that know their researchers have got funding from Wellcome Trust, for example, in the UK, need to send at the end of the year annual reporting and links and ensure there's a sort of compliance issue. So there's a lot of really interesting learning that we found and different areas where libraries do feel they can support authors and OA funds or where they don't, and they work more with sort of a subscription type method, a module. It's certainly interesting, and Matt will touch on this later. JMIR was one of the first actual institutions to do the Multipayer deal with the UC system, and now we're in discussions about renewing that deal. Now we're, I think, one of the early publishers, and really looking how UC have developed different agreements and how we can be sort of consistent and work within constraints from them. So, there's a real, in my mind, an active and interesting dialogue. This is sort of just one of the OA Switchboard slides. There's a number of really great infographics, but just to put in context when and where these eligibility messages can be sent, we choose to send them at acceptance just because we have a sort of triage system across a number of journals. But getting the returns, there's also a lot of core standard journal information we have to pull in, like if a journal's indexed in DOAJ and licenses and different factors, along with the sort of article level information from the author. So those are important to pass across to the libraries, that they can then build up their sort of decision making and automatic decisions. And then when the article is finally published, we can send the reporting P1 messages. So I think that's me for the sort of publisher perspective. Just to know there's a great number of publishers and libraries working together on OA Switchboard. But I'm going to hand over to Matt now, and we'll look forward to hearing if you have any questions or anything.
Thanks, Adrian. So I'm Matt Willmott. I'm the open access collection strategist at the California Digital Library, and I'm really excited to be joining you all virtually in Charleston. This is a great session to be a part of, and it's a topic that's really critically important to us at the University of California, where we're doing a lot of work to advance open access through agreements with publishers. And so a lot of these concepts are really, really critical as we move forward in that. So first, I think it's really important to acknowledge that this trend towards engaging in open access agreements has us acting as collaborators with publishers and other service providers more than we have in the past, right? I know this is being a little glib, but where previously our interactions were very much as customers who would ask to receive proposals for new content and haggle over percentage point growth in our ongoing subscriptions. Now we're engaging with publishers on a much deeper level. We're digging into data, workflows, fundamental models to develop shared solutions for transitioning to open access. We're piloting new business models. We're partnering on various innovations in the publishing space, including new types of publications, support structures. So this spirit of partnership really helps us move forward towards our goals. And that's especially true with pure open access publishers. Where legacy subscriptions with traditional publishers mean there's an existing relationship, an existing investment to leverage. Like Adrian was saying, our work with pure OA publishers requires more collaboration and creativity because we don't have that existing engagement. But it's important to note that that's a necessary component of a full shift in the publishing landscape. We can't focus all of our efforts on traditionally subscription publishers. That can disadvantage these full OA publishers, many of whom are more in line with our mission for open access, and where many of our authors with some of the strongest pro open access opinions are already publishing. It is important to note that these publishers have some unique challenges to address, though. Because a lot of them have an author-facing business model, we need to try to develop appropriate engagements with those publishers where none previously existed. Certainly speaking from the institutional perspective, in cases where an agreement requires some sort of financial investment, we need to figure out where that money is going to come from, particularly in this challenging budget climate, right? So the fact that there's no legacy subscription spend that we get to transition becomes an added challenge that we need to collaborate to solve. Yeah, thank you. So to talk about where these collaborations can have the most impact, it's helpful to look at some of our longer term goals for a transition to open access. One of our primary goals, at least at UC, is for authors to have the option to make their article open access regardless of what journal they choose to publish in. So this is very similar to what Katrin was talking about. Right. We strive to make open access the default. We conducted a study a few years ago, which included asking authors how much they prioritize certain factors when choosing where to publish. And open access was literally last on that list. So we don't feel like we can achieve this full transition by just advocating for authors to choose open access venues, but rather by allowing them to make their choices and then working to make their preferred publishing venues open access by default. To the extent possible, we try to offer a consistent level of support across all of our publisher agreements, no matter the type of publisher, hybrid or full open access, commercial or nonprofit, large or small publishers. Regardless of where authors choose to publish, we want them to have a consistent experience with the same options. And critically, we don't want a lack of available funds to be a deterrent to publishing open access. So we try to build models that support all authors with all levels of funding available to them. At the University of California, we have our vision of a support structure that accomplishes this, that we think could be extended across all journals and could be sustainable for other institutions in similar situations to us. I'll talk about that a bit on the next slide. But we also, sorry, if you could go back one slide, Adrian. We also want to streamline the process for engaging additional publishers. So currently, this is often a challenge because each agreement requires significant negotiation. There are sometimes hurdles for publishers to get over to reach agreement, and maybe significant limitations on our own bandwidth to engage with them. So if we're going to achieve a full transition, this process for engaging with more and more publishers needs to be much simpler per agreement. So, the pathway to all of these lofty aims is challenging. It's not short. It can involve shifting funding flows. It can involve potentially leveraging culture change among author communities. All that takes time. But through collaboration with our various partners in the publishing ecosphere, we can engage on strategies to move in the right direction while continuing to negotiate these agreements. Can you go to the next slide now? Thanks. So before I talk about some of the particular benefits of collaboration within this sphere, I want to give a quick explanation of what we at UC think is a potentially sustainable support structure for large research-intensive institutions in North America in particular. And this is our vision of the consistent support structure that I referenced on the previous slide. So this is what we've termed the multipayer model. Under this model, authors are given the option, which is generally presented as the default, to make their articles open access. And there's a fee for each article that's made open access. That fee is usually discounted from the list price APC. And then that fee is paid in portions. So the library always pays the first $1,000 of this fee. And then the author is asked if they have research funds available to pay the remainder. If they do, they pay the remainder using those funds. If they don't have those funds available, then the library pays the remainder. So in that way, we're supporting every author, and lack of access to funding isn't a barrier to an author choosing open access. We're also incorporating grant funds from those authors who are able to contribute them, which is important in the US research system where those funds are controlled by researchers. And this also asks authors to engage in the economics of publishing, even if they're not making a payment, which hopefully encourages them to become more thoughtful consumers in the future. So we see this as potentially sustainable for large research-intensive institutions, but one challenge we find find in the short term is this creates some additional requirements in the workflows we're asking publishers to implement, particularly compared to more traditional read and publish agreements. So that underscores the need to advance some of the strategies, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. So how do we collaborate between libraries, publishers, and other parties to reach some level of operational sustainability, which will allow us to advance, to accelerate our advance towards the long-term goals I was just talking about? Primary among these strategies here is the need to develop some consistency in our technology. And this is what both Adrian and Katrin have been talking about, particularly with the OA Switchboard. Since we're still in relatively early days of these agreements, a lot of the infrastructure is still in development. Many publishers are inventing or reinventing the wheel of workflow and implementation with each agreement. And that creates added work for both the library to oversee and it's inefficient for publishers, right, to be doing this, working on this separately. The multipayer model that I described is a good example where each publisher right now implements this slightly differently depending on their technological capabilities. And both we and our authors would really benefit from making these implementations more consistent. So as you've been hearing, there are already some services in development that can help address this. The Switchboard is a great example that's working to standardize and consolidate processes related to messaging. Another example that you'll hear about in just a minute is Oable, which is working to consolidate a lot of the approval, payment, and management processes. Another added challenge here is that each deal is currently structured slightly differently, particularly in how the library and publisher engage, and also often how the author and publisher engage. So neither of those situations is ideal, and it limits our bandwidth when we have to invest so much time in overseeing each agreement individually because they're all slightly different. Now that we're developing more agreements, we're finding that it'll be important moving forward to start to collaborate to make these more consistent, which will allow for more efficient management, both for the library and for the publishers. Here again, shared infrastructure can help make some of these implementations more consistent and sort of plug and play, if you will, rather than having a custom setup between each institution and publisher. And finally, collaborating to reduce complexity in these agreements is going to be an important strategy moving forward. Some of the complexity was necessary for getting things moving with appropriate protections for all parties, but eventually we're going to need to consolidate and take some of the training wheels off to make them easier to implement more widely. So I've listed here a few of the positive outcomes that we're seeing from this collaborative development, both now and in the future. What's important here is that making these advances is not just moving towards something in the future, but it's also having real world impacts now, because we're improving the experience for authors now with each step we take. We're reducing the amount of oversight we need to have of each agreement, or reducing the amount of resources needed for oversight. That lowers the barrier to entry for more and more publishers. Certainly the Switchboard is an example that's really helping publishers that wouldn't otherwise be able to engage in these agreements, be able to move forward. And critically, what this all means is that more content is able to be published open access as we're able to advance more and more agreements. And that's what really keeps me engaged here, right? Is that we're actively seeing over the last couple of years a lot more open access publishing. Just at UC, a third of our articles are now covered under one of our transformative agreements. And that means just in 2021, thousands more articles have been made open access that wouldn't have been previously. And so developing these shared improvements will make it possible to continue growing those numbers in the future. Thanks. And I think I pass it up to Olaf now. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Matt. So, welcome again, also from my point of view. So my name is Olaf Ernst. I'm the Chief Solution Officer of Knowledge Unlatched. It was really a pleasure to be here. First time for me virtually in Charleston. I would prefer it personal, but anyway, that's a different discussion. It's a great conference. So thanks also for inviting me, Adrian, to speak here on that panel. So there's the big advantage of being last in this process, because then I can always refer to my co-speakers before. And we have seen a lot of different, themes today, different perspectives, right? From Matt, from Adrian, and also from Katrin, along open access and the management of open access, about efficiency, about collaboration. And let me start what KU is thinking about this. And let me start by the first theme is about complexity, and I think that was already covered in a couple of talks before. So you've seen really massive growth in article output in open access. I think that's really obvious, and with a huge one in 2020. I think that was mainly driven by the pandemic, I guess, but still, 10-15% article growth, we all know it's massive, and that already has an impact whenever a market is really growing significantly strong on complexity, and that's what is already alluded to by what Matt and also Katrin saying, and both different angles on the authors, but also on the library side, because we have more and more players out there, right? Sorry, Adrian, more pure gold aid players. We have more and more business models, and definitely also more funding mandates. So there's a growing theme of complexity. And what Knowledge and Labs thought about is that's of course the complexity which doesn't stop at the library door. So that's why we thought that there should be a solution to help libraries manage this complexity, maybe even further, very, very detailed. And that's why we developed Oable, our workflow management solution tool, which I will talk about a bit later now. Next slide, please, Adrian. So that's what I said, is doesn't stop at the library door, the challenges, and Katrin was already alluding to this as well, and I hope you guys would agree in the audience. So when you talk about open access, and Matt did say as well about open access management, APC management, it's just growing, it's just adding more complexity, it's growing. And because for the reasons I talked before, is you have more publishers, coming in there, we have more agreements, more deals, and then in this core process of the workflows for the libraries, so approving it and then paying it, and then also reporting against it. It's just getting more complex with these different workflows. One publishers use a dashboard, others don't, and so it's getting really, really difficult to keep track on this and really getting it, proper. And that's why we thought there's maybe a system helpful to really help this process. And just one example, I just recently had a conversation with a big consortium in Europe, managing it centrally for their members. And he said to me over the phone, he said, so last year we had 1 transformative agreements, and now we have 21. So it's maybe more Europe driven because there's a huge demand for transformative agreements, but also Matt would hopefully agree there's also more and more demand as well, also in North America. So you can see, and he finally finished the conversation to say, I'm not going to manage this with a spreadsheet anymore. So there is really a pain point of thinking, well, let's use systems to help us to do so. Next slide, please, as well. And that's where we come up with the idea of Oable. So it's really as what co-speakers did do before, and also what Matt said, is really taking it from the point for the institution point where an article is accepted, and then going through the different approval, payment, and reporting stages, but really tries to just give it one workflow and one dashboard across publishers. I think that's where the main value comes from. So you don't have to do as an institution to lock in all different systems. And you can just do and manage either your transformative agreements, either read and publish deal, but also your APC management and your open access funds just with one system. So it doesn't mean Oable doesn't talk to other systems. We talk about the OA Switchboard. I give an example later. It talks to these systems, talk to publisher systems, but from an institutional, from a library point of view, they just doesn't have to know one system where they can approve, and where then Oable then talks with the other systems. So that should help in reduce the complexity quite significantly. That's what we believe in this process. So, and that's how it works in a bit more detail. I don't want to go into too much time because I know I don't have it, but if you look at a standardized process of a workflow, because it's a workflow solution tool, and it's interoperable, as I said, it's a key pillar, and it's flexible. So, but it follows these key processes, as you might be familiar with, is you're approving articles, either with the open access fund in the institution, but also with a transformative agreement, and going into the details of the financial transactions, which can be quite complex. Matt did say the multipayer model, split payment things, invoicing, deposits. So there's a lot of different financial transactions out there, which might need support. But last, I wouldn't say not least, is the reporting piece. Sorry, just one go back, and Adrian, is quite important to mention this as well, because there's more and more demand from funders now to getting reporting more structured, especially in the UK. So having it in one system really helps to do so, and also to visualize it in one that dashboard as well. So yeah, we are live with the systems. So it's not theoretical anymore. So it's our first customers. We're really proud to have them on board. But I would also want to say, because it is about technology in this session, and my lesson learned in this process is because we went through a very long development process with libraries, with development partners over more than 18 months to really understand the different workflows. And I think that's very crucial. For me, as a lesson learned, is technology helps to get to these solutions, but it's not fully all about this. It's really understanding workflows. And last but not least, I want to finish with this slide because we talked a lot about collaboration. We talked a lot about open access switchboard, JMIR, and so that's what we came up with the idea is just why don't we collaborate on what's already there, what's already out there, what's existing, not reinvent the wheel again, which is of course the vision of Oable as well. And then we just come together with JMIR, the open access switchboard, and with Iowa State to see, well, can we not look at the process really a bit more end to end from when the article is published, right, going through the systems, and then once it's really released and paid by an institution. So we just started this pilot together, as I said, with the OA Switchboard and Iowa State and JMIR. So when an article really is accepted from JMIR Publications, goes through the workflow, through the open access switchboard, which we just talked about, structurizing it, really helping then Iowa State then further downstream to manage it more, the payment process via Oable, and then giving the information back and to release the APC payment via Iowa State. And then, of course, going back to JMIR, say, hey, listen, this article can be published. So I think a great idea, I personally believe like this, and maybe more should be followed, where really there's just current infrastructure is used to work together without just saying and reinventing the whole wheel. So I think that's, I want to add to the current theme of discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Olaf. And I know we're coming up for time now. This was a sort of summary, but I'm going to invite very quickly our speakers just to sort of share their reflection, really as much on where we are now and where we see the future. I think we're at the sort of beginnings of some new and really interesting discussions and new infrastructures and technologies. But, you know, there is a process to go through to sort of try bring this together with a broader community. But I'm going to open it up to any of our speakers first, and then if there are any very quick questions, we seem to be running a little tight on time. But Katrin, Matt, Olaf, any comments on sort of how you see the big picture here and leaving remarks for the audience?
The only comment I'll make go ahead. Yeah, the comment I would make is just sort of an overarching reflection that you know, it's interesting that we're all coming from different angles to this, and we're all talking about very similar problems that we're facing and seeing similar solutions in this shared technology that will help make all this more efficient, right? This whole space is really at sort of a crossroads where we're moving from sort of startup pilot phase to something that we hope will be more sustainable moving forward. And it seems like we have some level of consensus about what that means moving forward in terms of developing systems.
Yeah, that's for me really to add what Matt is saying. I think became really obvious to me, and then when I was in the preparation of this panel here, is we all share the same goal. We all see where the market is developing, but we come from different angles. Maybe a bit more technology driven, right? A bit more workflow driven, sometimes maybe a bit more business model driven, a bit more author driven. But pulling it together, I think that's really very important. And I think there is already a lot out there, but just getting it really together and get the different wheels working to each other and getting to the same goal, I think is quite important. So I think collaboration and the central infrastructure is really key as well in order to get to the whole vision we want to get to, having more open access articles out there and published. Yeah, I think that's a good summary from my point of view.
Yeah. Jennifer, our moderator, I think we're up for time, but are there any pressing questions, or do we need to close this off now? No. We've put some contact details at the bottom. If people have questions, we'd love to hear. If people want to know more about OA Switchboard, other things, I'd encourage you there. If not, we may try to. Sorry.
There's just one question in the chat here, Adrian. I can see in the
okay.
Zoom chat. It's just a question of that all publishers are using the same standard data that we can use for workflow tools, and the clear answer is no. That's why we need these initiatives like the Open Access Switchboard and others to help us to standardizing here. Now, that's exactly the challenge. Maybe Adrian, you can better talk to this, but that's exactly what eventually the goal needs to be. In order to make it more seamless for any kind of solutions, we need to look at more standardization. That's why it's on the slide here, infrastructure standardization, and every initiative who can help to get there, I think, is really extremely important. So yeah, absolutely. So the answer is no, but I think we're on a good way to get there, I think.
Yeah, sure. And there's some really good discussions with the OA Switchboard working groups of certain fields that are used as a commonality of language across things like when you're updating submission forms. It's not expected that every publisher is reinventing the wheel. We should rather think about centralized solutions, right, in this process. And I think that's more important. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's the only question I saw in the chat, Adrian. So. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining. If you have further comments, feel free to get in touch. We hope you found this useful. We look forward to sort of continuing the discussion and seeing where things, and hopefully being there in person next year at Charleston. Thanks, everybody.